webinar today on how GE Smart Factory can help you track and optimize your labor resources. This webinar will be presented to you by our business consultants, Lance Burek and Oscar Montoya. Before getting started, I wanted to share and go over a couple housekeeping items. Make sure that you're muted. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat. We will address these questions as we go, and if not, we'll make sure to answer them in the end. If you require any technical assistance, you can email me at this email ID provided here. And then finally, this session will be recorded and shared to you after the webinar. Just as a reminder that this is a monthly webinar series, so we have been covering a lot of different interesting and trending topics within the digital manufacturing space. If you scan this QR code, you will be able to access all of our on-demand sessions that already happened, as well as you can register for our upcoming sessions. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Lance.
Awesome. So today we're really going to be discussing how to collect and actually optimize on your labor information utilizing Proficy Smart Factory. So we are just going to start with a quick agenda. So first we'll start off with understanding labor collection in manufacturing. It's really how it's been done historically and how we can now do that digitally today. We'll then talk about smart factory execution and labor collection, so how we can actually utilize the digital tool from GE Vernova to actually collect that labor information. And then we'll actually talk about gaining value from our labor data, so taking a look at a couple of examples in terms of smart factory modules as well as reports. And then from there, we'll take any questions. So I'll go ahead and jump into it. And again, first we'll start with really understanding labor collection in manufacturing. So why collect labor data? So there are a lot of benefits in terms of that labor data collection, whether it's on the operational side or whether that's on the administrative side. So specific to the operational side, labor data really helps with forecasting and planning. So really being able to better manage production schedules, seasonal demands, as well as market changes. Labor data can also help on the compliance and reporting front. So really by helping manufacturers meet legal requirements as well as corporate auditing requirements. And then also on the operational efficiency side, so really getting a better understanding of that data so you can then see where you have bottlenecks as well as inefficiencies. Now, on the administrative side, there are also a lot of benefits specific to things such as cost management. So labor data obviously provides insights into our labor cost, really enabling more of that detailed cost analysis. Our labor data can also help with strategic decision making. So on decisions such as expansion, contracts, or operational changes, labor data is really at the core of that. And then also just in terms of our productivity analysis. So really being able to understand our actual work versus our expected work, which really then allows us to facilitate better feedback as well as development plans and recognition programs. Now, historically, how have we collected labor data in the past? So one way is by utilizing a paper traveler, which I'm sure everyone on this call is very familiar with. So having that printed out piece of paper that represents our order, and within that order, we have sub-steps or operations where we have our technicians or engineers writing down what they've actually done on that job. Now, what you may do is then collect a stack of those paper travelers to really have that full stack of an overall order. And then if you want to arrive at that total time for that order, you would then have to manually add up all of those pieces of information, or you would have to scan the paper in, which obviously becomes very cumbersome. Another way labor information has been collected in the past is with the use of time studies. So having an operator or engineer go down to the shop floor, take a look at what's going on, and manually log what is happening as operators actually go through their work. Now, this can be helpful, but again, if you want true insight into your data, you do need that larger data set, which would ultimately require an engineer or operator to have to do this a lot. And obviously, that can be very cumbersome as well. Now, how can we make this easier? And so, really, a single step to get there is by digitizing this overall paper traveler. So, taking our step by step operations that make up an order or a routing and putting that into a digital system where we can digitally build out those individual operations, where we can select where that work is actually going to happen, and where we can apply those standard times on those operations. And then what we can get in return on the other end when that order is actually executed on is the actual time. And then we can do that comparison of our expected time versus our actual time. Now, in terms of digitizing that traveler, there are a lot of benefits outside labor and performance management. So things such as quality management, integrated work instructions, so technicians can properly follow their job in their specific operation. The overall traceability, so understanding your genealogy of a product, your general work order management and routing management, as well as preventative measures, really where the system can act as a defense mechanism. But again, most importantly, with that digital traveler, and what we're talking about today is how we can then do that labor and performance management. Now, how can we actually do this in Smart Factory? And I had mentioned this earlier, but really it starts with that standard time versus that actual time. So in the routings within Proficy Smart Factory, we can apply standard times at the operation level, where we can then break up that standard time by things such as our setup time, our runtime, our inspection time, as well as our transport time. And we can even get more granular. We can define what is actually happening at a piece of equipment or what is actual direct labor, meaning that we're having an engineer or operator actually work on that job. And we can define those standard times at the operation level, meaning if we do have that full routing of, say, 4 operations, we could define that for operation 10, operation 20, operation 30, as well as operation 40. Now, that's really the definition of the standard times. Now, how can we actually collect this? So via that digital traveler, we can then push operations or orders onto the shop floor where we can actually allow our technicians to start and stop jobs. And so what we'll see is that clock on, clock off, as well as if you follow my cursor to the left-hand side here, we can also see that time on task. So that's really our counter or clock that's going to start as we actually start this job. Now, again, going back to the manual or historical way of labor collection in the past, now what we're doing with this is we then have the ability to simply clock on. We can then actually focus on our work, and then once we've finished our work, we can come back here, and then this will then automatically move on to the next job. So we don't have to manually log our time, or we don't actually have to start a physical stopwatch. So next, we're actually going to put this into action and show this in the actual software. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Plan Applications next here. So the first module I'm in here in Plan Applications is our route editor here. And again, that route is really that path of work. And along that path of work, that's where we're defining things like our quality checks, the equipment area of where the work is actually happening, and then the standard times on those operations. So we're going to go into an example routing here called our Acme discrete route. And in this route, what we'll see are a couple of different operations that have already been predefined. And here we can see that op10 through op40. Now, if I move over to my resources tab here, and if I change this by operation, what we're actually going to see is that area where we can define those standard times. Now we'll be able to define that at that operation level again. So we'll be able to select that for operation 10 as well as through operation 40. And I might just need to give this a quick refresh here. Bear with me. Looks like we may be having some issues here. So we'll go ahead and move on to the unit operations where we can actually execute on our job here. For reference, what I was going to jump back to here was the actual definition. So where we can actually apply our standard times. What we're going to move on to now is the actual collection of those times via an actual order. So here I'm going to go ahead and clock on to my job here. So we're working with an order called AAE-2001. And in this order, what I can then do is actually clock onto my job here. And as I clock onto this job, what we'll see are things such as my work instructions, my quality tab, where I have the ability to actually do my quality checks. We'll also see things such as our bill of material for our consumption. So for example, here in this documents tab, this is where we can actually see what we need to follow as I go through this job. But more importantly, what you've now seen me do is actually start the job. And what we can see is that overall time on task. So how long we've actually spent on this operation. What we can also see here as well is I have the ability to change my labor types. So if I'm going to go ahead and do some direct work on this job, meaning I'm actually going to be working with my product, I'm going to have my hands-on product, we can go ahead and call this direct work. But maybe I'm going to do some setup activities where I don't want to count this against my direct work. I can also make that change. And now my operation is actually clocking me to that setup time versus our direct time. And again, as I go through this order, I can see things such as my documents. I can see things such as my bill of material. So really where I'm going to be doing that overall consumption. So taking what we have in inventory or from the ERP system and actually consuming that. And we can also see things here such as our quality or any of the checks that we're going to be interacting with. So this is really that execution piece. And as I've gone through, filled out my information, then we can go ahead and clock off of this job. And what the system will then do is record that direct time as well as that setup time. So we now have our actuals, and then we can do that comparison to our expected or to our standard times here. So that was that quick demo. Now, next, what we'll actually talk about is gaining value from our labor data. So really taking the information out of what I just executed on and going deeper and taking that larger look at that information. So I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to Oscar now.
Thanks, Lance. So within our Proficy Smart Factory, we have a module that is called time booking. And this module will provide us with a visualization of the time the operator is spent in all the operations, in all the work orders. So this is the window. And in here, you have the option to change the operator. You want to see the metrics. In this case, we are going to use the user lens. And then you can also change your view. You can either customize your view, selecting a time range that you want to pull, But in this case, we are going to use the last 7 days. And then we will have the list of work orders with the operations and the total time spent in all of those work orders and operations for that user, for that operator. And then you can also filter all of these work orders by just drag and drop your, for instance, your machine, and you will have a breakdown of the time spent for each machine, for each work order. So, and then you can just, you can do the same thing for type of operation. You will have a breakdown of your different operations and the time for each of the for each operation. Okay, so I'll go back here, and another tool is the labor utilization report. So in this case, we'll have an overview of our operators, and we'll have the metrics of the time each operator or all the operators have spent in each operation. Or you can also have a view of the time spent for the different products that they are producing or for the labor type. And you will also have the list of the orders that they have been executed. And more specific, for instance, in this case, we'll have the standard time that we have defined for this operation is 120, but the actual time is 118. So this is a view for all your operators, but then you can also select each of these operator. And I'm gonna select Ryan. In this case, the operator is not performing very well because he is spending more time than the standard time that we have defined. And again, we can have a view of the time spent for the different operations and for the different labor type, and also the time spent for the different products that in this case Ryan is being working on. And on the other side, we will have Michelle. Michelle is performing very well because she's just taking a little more time on this operation in assembly, and this for this specific product only. So this is a good example of an operator that is not performing very well and an operator that is performing well. And just finally, for your report, you can export this data into Excel, and these graphics, you can also export and download the graphic in as a picture or as PDF that then you can use and you can import or incorporate to your reports.
Great. Thank you, Oscar. So just to quickly summarize here. So what Oscar went through was that time booking application. So that out-of-the-box application that ships with Smart Factory, where we can take a look at what our operators are doing in that specific time frame. We also went over a couple of different examples of some Ops Hub or our low-code, no-code tool for reporting, where we can pull out information from the MES, and we can really create specific reports to your business process to analyze what you're taking a look at in terms of your labor information or labor KPIs. Now, as I move to this last slide, really what we talked about today was all about the collection and the analysis of our operational data in terms of labor information, utilizing what we call Proficy Smart Factory. But you can also utilize this data and send this data to different systems. So for example, we can send that information to an ERP system to do things such as our overall payroll, our costing, as well as our workforce planning and management. And we can also send that to other external systems, not only ERP systems, so systems such as external time and attendance systems. So there's a lot that can be done with that labor data and labor information. Now, just to quickly summarize why collect labor data. Again, there's a lot of benefits gained on the operational front. So really taking a look at some of the reports we saw today. So really better managing our overall operational efficiency based on what we know about our labor or about our operators. And then also just on the administrative side. So really making better strategic decision making along the lines of things such as expansion, contracts, or operational changes based on that larger set of our labor information. So there's a lot that can be done with that labor data.